turning off cell phones, other things, I want you to take. Hey everyone, welcome to this first video training together. In this video one, we're going to talk about the hidden wiring of your mind-body system, because we have to understand the components of what we're working with. Otherwise, you're always going to be working blind. So I want to dive right in, but I want each of these videos, I want us to do a little bit of centering first. And I'm not going to take up a lot of time for that, but just like we're going to be talking about in this video, you are more than just the mind component. So as you're going through this training with me, I want you to also be learning with the other parts of yourself. So we're going to start with that at the very beginning. So let's just take a moment and clear out your distractions for a moment. I don't make these videos epically long so that you can really digest and integrate them. And just wherever you are, turning off cell phones, other things, I want you to take a couple deep breaths, and just if you feel comfortable closing your eyes, or at least mostly closing them and lowering them, but ideally closed. And just imagine as if your eyeballs can kind of come down into the body, coming back through the throat, down through the chest, and really bring your awareness all the way down through the core of the body into the pelvic bowl, into the pelvis. And as you take a couple of breaths, start to scan your body on the inside. Really just pay attention and notice if there's any tight spots. And as you see any areas of tension, just really breathing in as if the breath can come in through the skin, so that as you breathe in, any areas of tension can be noticed. And as you exhale, any tension just flows right out. So just a couple breaths of being more grounded in the pelvis and being aware of any tension, and noticing that putting your awareness there in itself will help to loosen it. And then just really making an inner intention, and that can be thinking a thought, or ideally while your mind is down, at least at the level of the heart, ideally at the level of the pelvis, really thinking the thought like a strong laser beam request. What I really want to receive from this training is, and then just fill in the blank. And then setting your intention that I want to receive what I need on all levels. And we're really getting into the mode where we are with our whole being and not just the thinking mind, even as there will be lots for the thinking mind to focus on and to learn in this time together. And then just slowly coming back. If you want to make a little transition, you can rub all your hands together, build a little cheer, a little warmth. You can just kind of give your face a little rub down, kind of patting your brain, waking up the head, back of the neck, body patting, chest, back, legs, kind of coming back to this time and place. Okay, good. So as I said, this is one of the most key components that is often missed, and we're going to dive into really three aspects of the body. We're going to talk about the components of the mind-body system. And then we're going to talk about what's within those components and their connections. And then we're going to talk about sort of how they are accessed and not accessed. So you can really understand, you're going to have a lot of aha moments, especially since if you're here, you've been doing the work for a while. You're probably not new to the world of therapy or to self-help. And so this is really a deeper level training. So what's important to know first is that the mind, body, spirit, the subtle body, a human being has different layers. And we can look at this from all different angles. We could get very specific down to meridians or nadis, depending on which ancient system you're using. And so this is an overview of the most key components in a practical way. Everything that I'm giving you is really to understand practically. And this is one of my, I'm a nerd and a self-help junkie, and I've been a practitioner and a student, spiritual practitioner, really this whole lifetime. And so I love learning systems and things, and ultimately to really affect change, to really get ourselves out of suffering, to really get ourselves into the life that we're really being called to, we need the practical shit. So I'm always going to be, yes, I like the systems, but I'm always going to be bringing it back to what's the most practical information that you can actually implement in your own life. So what we know, most of what happens is when we are suffering, let's say this little circle is like the cloud of suffering that we can feel that something is off. It's not just off in our mind, it must also be in our body. And so when we have a problem that comes up, it's coming across and affecting all parts of ourselves. The problem is that we have multiple parts in our system, and so we have to start to identify and think about those. So the three parts that I want you to be in contact and aware of is first what we call the mind. Now, the mind has a lot of components, and we're going to get to that in a second, but the mind is predominantly, we could also call this the thinking mind in itself. So this is the thoughts that we hear in our head, the mind, and we're mostly of us familiar with those type of things. Then we have sort of what we would call the body, or the mind body, or the mind body complex. It has a lot of different names. And this is a combination of our physical body, but also the energetics and the subtleties of our physical body. So there's a mind body system. And then there's sort of the level of the heart. Now, this doesn't just mean the physical heart, because obviously the physical heart is part of the physical body, but we could also call this the soul. This is the non-physical part of ourselves that all of the spiritual traditions talk about. So depending on your tradition, you might have a different understanding of that. So we could call it heart, soul, inner self, higher self. All of those are names for this particular level that we're talking about. Okay, so whenever we are talking about subtle body, and the term that I'm using, subtle body, is a combination of, the subtle body is not just one of these. The subtle body is the sum total of these things, and particularly these spaces in between. So my expertise and this sort of groundbreaking level of this type of work is actually how all of these fit together, and specifically how they practically wire in and interact with each other. Because nowadays, nobody, well, most people accept that there is a mind body connection. You have mainstream medical researchers, even, old school doctors who maybe aren't super into alternative medicine and things. Most of Western medicine will even say, yes, there is a mind body connection. We have research that says people who go through emotional upheavals, people who have traumatic upbringings, are at a higher risk for things like inflammation and for autoimmune disease. And we all know experientially that when we have a heartbreak emotionally, it feels physically crappy in our physical body. So no one denies that there is a mind-body connection. The problem is the exact understanding of practically how that works, how to hack that system. It is what is terribly missing. And that's what we're talking about when I'm talking about my subtle body work. And this is coming from me being a little bit of a unicorn, of being quite straddling several different things. Because part of the problem, and we're going to see this in a moment, is that what we have when we experience emotional or life suffering or trauma is we are pushed towards the level of therapy. And therapy is quite good, but therapy as a tradition, as you'll see in a moment when we superimpose it over this system, therapy is geared towards and a tradition of the mind and understanding the thinking mind. So that's good, and those are important, but it's not a deep understanding of the mind-body system. The deep understanding of the mind-body system comes from ancient medicine like Ayurveda and Chinese medicine. I've been an acupuncturist for over 10 years. Part of why acupuncturist goes to school for 3 to 4 years full-time clinically is to really understand what is the wiring of the mind-body system, and a little bit of this connection of how the mind-body system starts to go back this way and affect the mind as well. Then we have the problem is that the ancient medicine people don't really want to delve too much deep into the mind, because Eastern culture, a lot of those things were sort of dealt with in the construct of culture. Like there wasn't as much of interpersonal decision. A lot of your relationships or who you married was dictated by your culture. So you didn't really have to have as much in-depth mind interpersonal work. You just do what society says. So Western medicine and Western I would say Western therapy really developed as a response to Western culture where we are more individualized. And so we need to work more on our mind levels to have better interpersonal and guide ourselves. Whereas Eastern traditions had this depth of understanding the mind body system and know that it affects the mind, but didn't really delve on how to deal with the mind as much. And then these two don't really talk to each other. Acupuncturists don't want to deal with emotions. There's even acupuncturists out there who like acupuncturists shouldn't talk with their patients. That's like playing like you're a therapist. And they wanted to keep it really separate. And we know traditionally in Western medicine, if you come into a medical doctor and you say, I'm depressed, they're either going to give you an antidepressant or they're going to refer you to a therapist. So we can see culturally that there is not really very much overlap at all between these two. Let alone when you get into the level of heart or the soul, nobody, people really in therapy don't or feel uncomfortable dealing with it. They're like, that's a religious thing or that's a spiritual thing. We don't want to deal with that. And the mind body ancient medicine understands that there's an intercorrelation, but culturally and otherwise, they don't really want to go there either. But there really is a technical side for how these all relate together. And so none of these things have been talking. So my background is coming from being a trained acupuncturist, 10 plus years clinical experience, being a lifetime meditator, and I've gone deep into the Eastern healing arts. So I took my first yoga class when I was in high school. I did my yoga teacher training in India. I've had direct lineage guidance from a Vedic spiritual Swami in a unbroken 300-year-old lineage of understanding the secret stuff that traditionally you had to find a teacher and meditate in caves for, years before you could find someone to teach you that behind the scenes. So bringing these things together, as well as the therapy world. I've done my fair share personally of therapy, and I've done deep mentorship with a somatic therapist. And so I know what the benefits of that system are and also what the limits are. So I'm bringing all of these things together, which is how we get faster, deeper results for people. I even train people who have master's degrees in somatic therapy, and they're amazed that this is like, a little bit like what I learned in school, but way faster and way deeper, and you don't have to talk about it. So that's where we're coming from. So now let's delve into what are the components of each of these and get a little bit deeper. So as I said, the mind, we could also call this the thinking mind. And there's lots of things in here. I'm distilling it a little bit to be on the simpler side so you can start to digest it before we go deeper into the more complicated levels. So the mind and the thinking mind, at the mind level, this is where we have the level of thought. And thoughts are good, thoughts are important. And most of what therapy is focusing on is organizing your thoughts and recognizing the sort of bad thoughts or unhelpful thoughts and replacing them with more positive thoughts. This is good. If you can choose to have negative thoughts or positive thoughts, better to have positive thoughts. If you can understand intellectually how aspects of your upbringing or how certain behaviors of people around you created a consequence or a habit in your system, that is a helpful thing to do. And it helps you organize your thoughts and it helps you upgrade your thoughts so that you have more functional thoughts. The problem is that it only affects this mind level, and thoughts generally, they have, there's always a little bit of an interconnection between these areas. So your thoughts can have an effect on your body in a certain way because these are all connected, but it's a small influence. So in general, the problem and why you're probably here watching this video, you either are a therapist yourself and you're like, yeah, I know I help people organize their thoughts, but it doesn't help them change their behavior, or you're someone who has done all the therapy, who knows positive affirmations, who's been working on those things, and you've noticed that it hasn't stopped the pattern from coming up, that you know the thing in your mind, but you're not actually able to do it in your life. Whenever that happens, whenever we know something in our mind, but we're not actually able to do it in our body, that is a sign of subtle body block or subtle body dysfunction, that there's something going on in the system, especially in between these wiring spaces where they're relating to each other, where something is off and not working. And whenever that happens, you won't be able to up level to actually get your soul things out into the world because this wiring is not working correctly. So that's what we need to fix. So now let's move to this body mind sort of level. Now we could call this different things. And in therapy terms, this is the place where our nervous system is happening. This is the place where the, social regulation, vasovagal response system is happening sort of in this level. And especially in Eastern medicine, the chi or the meridians or the prana or this deeper level of how everything fits together, that is functioning on this body mind level. And the body, when you really understand the body mind level, you start to naturally get more ability to influence the mind. Now, this isn't the only thing you need to do. If the body mind thing was so strong that you could just go to an acupuncturist and it would totally heal your understanding, that would be great, but that's not the case. I will say, and I've seen over the years, people who do deep mind body work do tend to have an easier time training their thoughts. So there is a stronger influence going in this direction from the mind body into the mind, because their mind is in the body. So the mind body towards the thinking mind level is a stronger influence than the mind level going towards the body. They're still connected. There's still a two-way circuit, but this mind body level is so much more broad than just the thinking mind that making changes here will have a greater influence on the mind than vice versa. So if you are someone who has ever done things like, let's see, those are all grouped together. So if you have ever done something like Ayurvedic treatment or acupuncture, or you've done like Tai Chi or yoga or Qigong, these things are all these modalities are very heavily trained and aimed at altering your mind-body system. So you'll notice that they'll help your physical body feel better. Obviously, the physical body is partly in here. I'm going to add that in here. So part of the component of this part of the system is your physical body. And your chi body, as we would say, the makeup of your physicality and your energy field is also here, your aura, all of those things are existing in this mind body level. So you can see that it is really broad. So if you've ever done a modality or gone deep into yoga or Tai Chi, you notice that not only does it transform your physical body and your health, which in Western society is why most people start, I'm going to do yoga for my health. And then you start to notice that it actually has benefits on your mind as well. So you can see it's going in that direction. Sorry, I got a little hair in my mouth. So what else occurs at this level? This is also the level of some stuff we're going to go deeper in the next training video, but what I call your protector system, which is very key and important to understand. So we're going to talk about that in training number 2. And this is also the level of sensations, which are really important. And we're going to talk about that and decode that in training number 2 as well. So now let's look at this other component, the heart or the soul level. Again, this is not the physical heart per se, because that would happen here. And even the chi of the heart happens here. This is like heart with a capital H. So we could also call it the soul. We could call it the higher self. We could call it the inner knowing. In Chinese medicine, every organ system, and the organ means the physical part, but also the energetic sort of concept, the symbol of that organ. And the concept of the heart is called the emperor of the body. So even in ancient medicine, they knew that the heart really is this very special, connected to the heavens somehow emperor. And in ancient Chinese culture, it was perceived that the emperor had been like divinely chosen and was not quite human in that particular way, but somehow a sort of celestially chosen person to rule the system. And that is the heart. So there's lots of clues in lots of different traditions about the heart being this special, works by a different means. And we can actually have contact with that in a practical way. So this heart or soul level is the level of ourselves that if you've ever gone into deeper meditative practices or in deep aspects of prayer, you get to this aspect where there is sort of like a spaciousness, an awareness, a knowing. There is an aspect of ourselves that is deeper than even all three of these, which I would call, awareness, or the self with a capital S. But we're not going to quite go as deep into that in this particular training. But the heart soul aspect is sort of as close we get to that deep mystery that's still within our subtle body, mind, body system. So in the heart level, what's happening here is our inner knowing. That aspect that really is the abiding part of ourselves, the part that is closest to the deeper reality. This is the part of ourselves to which nothing has ever happened. Nothing can happen. That abiding, constant place of ourselves is we get closest to us when we are listening to the voice of the heart. The other thing to know is who's in charge and influenced by each of these. So, this part of the system, the heart and the soul, is the aspect of ourselves where we are constantly connected and influenced by love with a capital L. We can call that connection. We can call that oneness. We can call that unity. We can call that, God, the great mystery. Whatever you call that, the great love with a capital L, this is its territory in the human system. This is its realm. This is where it is meant to be an influence, and where we can come inside of ourselves to really connect with that larger aspect. In a similar way, when we think about the thinking mind is terribly influenced by the influence of fear. Sometimes it's overt, where we can really have worst case scenarios, thinking, worry, panic. We see something in the outer world, or we watch something in the news, and our mind grasps onto it and makes rules and meanings about it. This is not just the mind, it's the mind under the influence of fear. Now, if we get more spiritual for a second, we can know, and we're not going to go as deep in this training together because I want to teach you about the wiring, but I want you to know behind the curtain, what's really happening is that we can develop our subtle body and clear the stuff out of the way so that the influence of the heart and the soul and the inner knowing start to permeate more and start to make their way over to the mind, so that we can enjoy and live with a mind that is calm and following the heart, versus a mind that is trying to take over, is influenced by fear. It's like that, if you've ever seen that Disney movie, where all of the little characters, you're seeing them inside people's heads, and you sort of see that the person acts tremendously differently depending on who is pulling the levers. Is it the little scaredy cat guy? Is it the anger guy? It's very similar. This is really how it works, and I think why that was such a great movie, Inside Out. So overall, part of what we're doing in the big picture is not just to get out your traumas and the things that you've been through in the past. The real point is so that you can be as you are, your true soul gifts, your true inner purpose. This aspect that shines through you at this inner heart soul level can actually get out into the world and be the way that you live by. That's really why we're even having this whole gosh darn conversation. So let's flesh this out a little bit more. Let's go back. I want you to kind of see these components of what the thinking mind is. So the thinking mind, which is often influenced by fear, this is the realm of thoughts. And these sort of guys in the circle are sort of, the heads of the realm. There's other people that are in charge there, but other things that live here are, again, meaning. Our mind is the place where we put meaning onto things. Meaning does not exist outside of the mind. It is a construct of the mind. This is also the realm of archetypes. People get real super jazzed about archetypes. I'm a big Jungian fan. I think he was super ahead of his time. And he's also very much coming from a head down tradition, like most of therapy. So I think archetypes, they start to they start to get us in touch with the energy of how things work, but they are still very much in the level of the mind, in the conceptual mind. They're more positive than negative thoughts, but they're still in the mind realm. This is also the realm of symbols, and this is also the level of shadow work. Now, shadow work, it sort of starts to tip over, sort of getting towards, it's leaning towards a connection of other parts, because you're going beyond, you're starting to think about archetypes and symbols, and it's the deeper parts of the mind where we're really starting to turn towards fear and to see the dark places in ourselves. Sometimes when people, when I'm describing subtle body work, or I've done a post, people on the internet who have never met me and are not educated about this work will be like, oh, well, this sounds like shadow work, and I've done shadow work already. So shadow work is good, but it's still in the level of the mind, because if you've done shadow work, it's a lot about symbols, archetypes, meaning, seeing that I'm judging someone else because that's a deep part of myself. It's still a function of the mind. So we're still functioning at this mind level. It's effective, it's good, it helps to organize the thoughts, and it helps to upgrade the thinking so that the mind thinking can be clear. But it does not generally touch on this mind-body aspect. Like I said, it's leaning a little to the left of the side, because sometimes it will start to get on the elements when you're dealing with deeper stuff like fear or death, or archetypes are mental constructs that are deeply informed by the energetic nature and makeup of reality. That's what an archetype is. It's like the queen is it's a picture of an archetype that is the hard to track elements of reality that are distilled down into either a humanized form or a concept so that our human brains can understand them more deeply. So the elements of nature sort of exist here in the mind body functioning, and we're distilling them down into archetypes. So these things are starting to lean in that direction, but they do not know how to cross the barrier and actually affect the mind body system by playing by the mind body system rules. Now, sometimes people will ask about inner child work. Oh, well, is this like inner child work? And inner child work is the inner child, actually, she belongs sort of, I would say, a little bit in between, I would say. She's not totally in the mind because she exists within within the, in the inner self. The unconscious is part of the body mind system. Let's put that in there because that's important. So what we have sometimes called in Western psychology, our unconscious mind is a communication from and at this level of getting towards the mind body system, because it's not in the thinking or conscious mind, it is in the body mind. But just the problem that you've even heard from, people say is like, oh, well, I might be doing that, or I might feel that way, but it's unconscious. That's because it's trapped in the mind body. So the unconscious, what we call with maybe a capital U, would live here. And the inner child is somewhat an aspect of our mind body system. But the way that unless you are interacting with the inner child in a way that is subtle body appropriate, that is in line with with how the subtle body and the mind body wiring works, your inner child work is going to be limited. So just acknowledging that there is an inner child is a thinking mind thing. Communicating, talking with the inner child, seeing yourself hug and hold your inner child and come into relationship, that's starting to cross over a little bit. That's why I'm putting her in the center. But to really change and have your inner child up level her programming usually takes a subtle body connection that's here in the mind body and is heavily crisscrossing between the mind and the body. So let's see what else we have here. We talked about shadow work. We'll put that in here. That's kind of leaning over to the side. And then, therapy or counseling generally is here. Now, you might say, well, what about somatic therapy? And maybe some of you are somatic therapists. And somatic therapy is my favorite type of therapy. I've done a lot of Hakomi work. My main mentor in somatic therapy is a Hakomi trainer. Used to be a professor at Naropa University, which has one of the biggest somatic programs in the country. And so I would say that somatic therapy, so regular CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, most aspects of therapy are heavily and solely focused in the mind area. So the best that they can do, which is important work, is to upgrade the mind and really understand and organize the thoughts and upgrade the thoughts to be more positive, organized, functional versions of thoughts than were maybe there before. Somatic therapy, so we could make another one of these for somatic therapy. Somatic therapy does start to look towards and engage the mind body system. Well, it engages the physical body. So, somatic therapy, we could put sort of here. And what I will say is that, somatic therapy, like I said, I'm a fan, but it's also very much come from a mind-based tradition towards the body. The mind-based tradition started saying, hey, we should probably incorporate the body. That would be more effective. But I want you to see how that's very different than starting from a deep, ancient understanding of how the mind body works and then coming up to the mind. Ultimately, this is a huge flip, and why so many somatic therapists that I've trained are like, oh, I get it. I kind of knew a little bit about the body and the sensations, but I didn't really know how the wiring works. And so, the most sometimes that somatic therapy can do is help people be aware of the body, to incorporate the body a little bit more, which is helpful and can sometimes unwind thing in itself. But it's not really a hacking the subtle body approach, because you have to actually know what's happening in order to hack something. So it's just been missing the deeper understanding because it doesn't have that tradition. So somatic therapy tends to incorporate and have an influence on the physical body, which is a part of the mind-body complex and will often be helpful in some ways. It just has a limit because it doesn't deeply understand the mind body system in a functional way. Somatic therapists can talk about this activates this part of the brain, and this is what we see, and this is research and your attachment system. But that's not exactly a practical approach for when you feel something like this in your body, what exactly do you need to do? What does it mean if it shows up here in the solar plexus versus it shows up on the left side of the heart? What does it mean if they've got a tightness at the back of the heart? And what do you do for each of those to actually change the sensations in the moment and have it actually release from the body without just being with it and practicing being with it and practicing being with it? It's good to practice being with stuff, but there's a whole heck of a lot that you can do. You don't actually just have to be with stuff when you understand how it works. You can actually release it from the body because you know the actual rules of how everything works. Whew! So what we have covered in this video is the understanding of your hidden mind-body wiring system. So the last thing that I want to do to bring it all home, because we've talked about these three components: mind, body, mind, and heart, and what those really represent at the deeper level, what the components of them are, when and how they tend to be bridging these gaps. And obviously there's more connection. There's ways that the heart connects with the mind body, the heart connects with the mind, all of those things. But this is the most important part to start to get practical. And we've talked about how different modalities might interact in a certain sphere, but not necessarily understand this wiring of how things are working together. Because subtle body work is happening across these three levels. So subtle body work is, I'll have to make another thing, but subtle body work is happening across all three of these levels so that you can get results, not just in your mind, but especially here where the root of it is. We're going to talk about that in one of the next training videos, and actually bring all these things together to really release it from your system. I want you to imagine that these different levels are like a puzzle. Imagine three shapes, and each of the shapes has a little bit of a notch in the front of it. So if you have something down here that you need to get out, but it has to go through these three levels, what you actually need to do is you need to align each of those so that the opening, the notch in each of those is lined up correctly. So there's a pathway for the inner stuck stuff to actually get up and out. And so that's what we're doing in subtle body work. First, we're understanding these levels, and then we are adjusting all three of these components of the subtle body system so that there is a true open gateway with the way that they're all communicating to actually release things and get them out for good. So the last thing that I'll show you is sort of to see how that makes a difference, because what is usually happening in a practical way is that in our experience. So we've taken it from the theoretical into our practical experience. And what normally happens when we're just generally having a hard time in life and we've got some dysfunction is that something triggers us. My mother-in-law says something, my neighbor comes across yelling, something happens, and it triggers me because of what's going on in my inner self. And I start to feel upset or activated, or I feel uncomfortable. And maybe I also have some mind stuff going on. And so I'm not sure why I feel wrong. I tend to probably blame whoever the trigger is, that it's their fault. And I just know that I'm unhappy. So when we take that to the therapy level, again, this is in the mind level, and you may have seen me explain this in other videos elsewhere, is that the therapy or the self-help cycle, it's that similar thing. We get triggered, we feel physically activated, but now we're a little smarter because we've organized our thoughts. And so we're like, oh, I see that I'm getting triggered, and yes, they're a jerk, but this is in me. And so I've read some self-help books, or I've worked with a therapist, and the therapist has given me strategies. So even though I'm still physically activated, I can actually, like, I understand why this is happening. I'm not acting out as much. I'm still having the same shitty experience on the inside, but I'm not like punching my neighbor in the face anymore because I know that they're just lonely and angry and taking it out on me. The problem, the good part is that I feel a little better. I'm able to deal with my neighbor a little bit more proactively. It's not as terrible, but I still don't want to deal with them, and I still get a feeling on the inside. And the real problem is that just knowing those things does not stop the trigger from happening and does not stop me from feeling activated in the first place. So what we're talking about, when you really understand these things differently, it actually breaks the cycle. Because when you're understanding how everything fits together, when something triggers you, it actually, you still feel upset and physically activated, but you now have the exact knowledge of the wiring where when it comes up, here's how I use these subtle body appropriate techniques to actually get down to where the trigger is in me, the Velcro, as we say, dissolving the Velcro. And I actually release that so that the same thing that used to trigger me, the next time the neighbor comes up and says that, I don't get the physical activation. So it's really this axis right here that breaks to actually get into a new place. So, you know, I'm an East Coast kid. I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And although I've done, you know, quite esoteric things, you know, things that people don't even think are possible in my inner experience, and going deep in these, you know, deep inner tradition type of ways, I'm still a very practical person. And what we always have to ask at the end of the day, if you take nothing else away from these trainings together, is that ultimately we need to judge by results. If whatever you're doing in any kind of therapy, in business, in your relationship, if you do a certain technique and you notice that it helps for a while, but it ultimately comes back, it's only logical to see that that intervention that you applied was not getting down to the source. It was a management technique versus an actual deep getting to the root solution technique. So we must, in any area, in whether it's in our personal growth, in our work with clients, or in our spiritual lives, we have to ultimately see, is the thing that I'm doing producing lasting and unchanging results? And that is possible. And that's what we're talking about. And that's why we're here together. So you want to be able to see that when I apply these things, yes, I should feel different in the moment. But ultimately, as I'm completing this cycle and going deeper and really getting to the source, we're going to talk about that in one of the next videos. Video 3, I'm pretty sure, that I'm actually starting to see that there's a fundamental change. I have had people say, like, gosh, Leslie, this, you know, I've made more changes in the first 4 weeks of your training than I did in 10 years of therapy. Or a therapist who said, gosh, I don't even remember, I was so attached to that healing, wounded healer archetype. I don't even remember what it's like to be like that anymore. So that's what I want for you. And I know there are no mistakes in my world. So if you are here, we have some learning to do together. And I want you to really absorb this training and start to understand and start to put your ahas together so that you can really be of benefit to yourself and others. Thanks so much, and I'll see you on the next training.